What do you do with a silence that has a heartbeat? What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a creature they left behind? Elias didn't know. So he just stood there, on the frozen mud, watching his breath turn to smoke in the Virginia dawn. The cold bit clean through his city coat, a useless thing in this place. Frost had silvered every fence post, every dead blade of grass, turning his grandfather's rundown farm into a world of ghosts. It had been 3 months since the funeral. 3 months since the world had tilted on its axis and never quite righted itself. He'd come here to sell it all. The land, the crumbling farmhouse, the barn that leaned like a tired old man against the wind. He just wanted it gone, a clean cut. But his grandfather's lawyer had been clear. "Everything is yours," he'd said, sliding a folder across a polished desk. "The house, the acreage, and the mule." The mule. It felt like a joke, a final, folksy riddle from a man who had spoken more in handwritten notes than in actual words. The wind rattled the empty stable, a hollow sound that scraped at Elias's nerves. He could smell it from here. That scent of old hay, damp earth, and something else, something uniquely animal, ancient. He'd been avoiding this for weeks. He'd paid a local girl to come by to drop hay and fill the water trough, but he hadn't been able to bring himself to walk down this path. To the barn. He finally moved. His boots crunched on the rigid ground, a sound that felt too loud in the quiet of the morning. The barn door groaned open on rusted hinges, the noise echoing in the cavernous dark inside, and that's when he felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a presence, a weight in the air. In the far stall, a shape resolved itself from the shadows. It wasn't a horse. Horses hold a kind of nervous energy, a constant flicker of motion. This was different. This was stillness. The absolute, unmoving patience of stone. It was a mule, gray and scarred with long, watchful ears that didn't so much as twitch at his arrival. It stood under the single dusty window, a pale stripe of morning light illuminating, the map of old wounds on its hide and the deep, dark wells of its eyes. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes, not really. They held a kind of knowing that felt older than the rotting timbers of the barn itself. They just watched him, unblinking. Elias's plan had been simple. Call the vet. Have the old thing put down. It was cruel to leave it here alone. A kindness, he'd told himself. But looking at it now, the word felt like a lie. This creature didn't look like it needed kindness. It didn't look like it needed anything at all. He took a step inside, the door swinging shut behind him, plunging the space into a deeper gloom. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light. The mule's head was low, its posture relaxed, but its gaze never left him. Elias could hear its breathing now, a slow, rhythmic huff, like a blacksmith's bellows worked by a tired arm. Steady. Calm. He walked closer, his heart a stupid, frantic drum against his ribs. He didn't know a thing about animals. He'd grown up in apartments, surrounded by concrete and sirens. This was his grandfather's world, a world of dirt and patience Elias had never understood. "Hey," he said. The word was a puff of air, swallowed by the silence. One of the mule's ears swiveled back, just a fraction, acknowledging the sound. Then it swiveled forward again, waiting. Elias stopped a few feet from the stall. The wood of the gate was worn smooth in places, almost polished. How many years had his grandfather stood right here, in this exact spot? He ran a hand over the wood, feeling the grain, the splinters. He felt like a trespasser in his own life. He was wearing his grandfather's old coat now, the one he'd found hanging by the door. It smelled of wood smoke and earth. It didn't fit right. He looked at the mule, really looked at it. There was a brand on its flank, a strange, faded marking he couldn't make out in the dim light. Its coat was the color of a winter sky, and its muzzle was soft and white with age. It was old. Impossibly old. The vet had said as much on the iPhone. "Older than any mule I've ever seen, Mr. Vance." Your grandfather? He had a way with things. Elias leaned his arms on the gate, the cold of the wood seeping into his sleeves. He didn't know what to say. He just felt the great gaping hole his grandfather had left in the world. He'd been the quiet center of Elias's life, a fixed point. And now there was just this. This silent creature in a silent barn. A living relic. A final, stubborn piece of a life that was over. He let out a long breath, not realizing he'd been holding it. The sound was ragged. Close to a sob. The mule shifted its weight, a soft clink of a hoof on the packed earth floor. It took one slow, deliberate step forward, then another. It stopped right in front of him, its head just over the gate. It was close enough now that he could feel the warmth radiating from its body. He could smell the sweet, grassy scent of its breath. It just stood there. Its deep, dark eyes were fixed on his. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was just a gaze. A quiet witnessing. Elias found himself lifting a hand. He didn't know why. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out, expecting the animal to flinch, to pull back. It didn't. It lowered its great, heavy head, and ever so gently, it rested its nose against the palm of his outstretched hand. The skin was rough, calloused yet impossibly soft. Warm. Elias's breath hitched in his throat. A strange current passed through him, a feeling he hadn't felt in months. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. It was just connection. A single, fragile thread in the overwhelming emptiness. He stood like that for a long time. Man and mule. The sun climbed higher, casting longer, warmer stripes of light across the dusty floor. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the sound of two beings breathing. Finally, he pulled his hand back. The mule didn't move. It just watched him, its expression unchanged. "Okay," Elias whispered, to himself, to the animal, to the ghosts in the barn. Okay. He had to get out. He had to breathe air that wasn't thick with memory. He turned, his boots clumsy on the uneven floor. He fumbled with the latch on the barn door and pushed it open, stepping out into the blinding, cold light. Took a few steps, then a few more, heading back toward the house, toward the phone, toward the life he was supposed to be living. He didn't look back. He didn't want to, but he heard it. The soft crunch of hooves on frozen earth. Slow. Measured. Unhurried, he stopped. His whole body went rigid. He didn't dare to turn, not at first. He just listened. The sound was closer now. Slowly, he turned around. The mule stood 20 feet behind him. It had somehow opened the stall gate, a heavy wooden latch that Elias himself had struggled with. It had pushed its way through the half-closed barn door and was now standing in the yard, its long ears pointed straight at him. It wasn't following him, not in the way a dog would. It wasn't asking for anything. It was just there. A silent, gray shadow against the winter-bleached fields. Watching him. Waiting. And Elias didn't know why. But for the first time in 3 months, he felt like he wasn't entirely alone. He just didn't know if that was a comfort or a terror. The days that followed fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm. Elias worked, clearing out the farmhouse one room at a time, and the mule watched. Elias never gave him a name, not out, loud. In the quiet of his own mind, he began to think of him as the shadow. It was always there, a silent observer at the edge of his vision. When he sorted through rusted tools in the shed, the mule would stand by the fence line, ears cocked toward the clang of metal. When he sat on the porch, staring into the gray twilight, the mule would graze just yards away, its presence a heavy, comforting weight against the crushing loneliness. Elias fought it. He told himself it was just an animal, a beast of burden, waiting for its end. He tried to stay distant, to see the creature as just another asset to be dealt with. But the mule made it impossible. It never demanded anything. It never whinnied for food or nudged him for attention. It simply was. a constant, steady companion in his grief. One afternoon, sorting through a pile of his grandfather's books, he came across an old photograph. A young man in a worn coat, his grandfather, stood beside the same gray mule. The animal looked no different. The same scars, the same ancient eyes. The date on the back was from 50 years ago. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. How old was this creature? The tension in him was a wire pulled taut. He was being drawn into the orbit of this place, of this animal, and it terrified him. To connect was to feel. To feel was to risk the pain of loss all over again. He'd packed the boxes, he'd called the realtor. He was leaving. Soon. He had to. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of slate. He'd finally forced himself into the last room, his grandfather's study. It was the heart of the house, the heart of the man. Dust sheets covered the furniture, making pale ghosts in the dim light. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. It smelled of him. Elias felt his throat tighten. He pulled a sheet off a heavy oak desk. It was just as his grandfather had left it. A stack of books on the Civil War, a magnifying glass, a half-finished letter. And in the center, a small, dark wooden chest bound with iron straps. It wasn't locked. With trembling fingers, Elias lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a single object, a journal. The leather was cracked and brittle with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. The handwriting wasn't his grandfather's. It was an elegant, looping script, faded to brown. The date on the first page read, May 4th, 1864. He sank into the desk chair, the leather sighing under his weight. He began to read. It was the journal of his great-great-great-grandfather, Corporal Josiah Vance of the Union Army. He wrote of mud, of fear, of the deafening roar of cannons. And he wrote of the mules, the quiet, stubborn heroes of the war, carrying supplies, ammunition, and the wounded. Then, Elias's breath caught. An entire entry, dedicated to one specific animal. They assigned me a new mule today, a slate gray, creature with the calmest eyes I have ever seen. While other beasts panic at the sound of gunfire, this one simply stands, as if listening to a story only he can hear. I have named him Old Traveler, for he seems to have walked this earth. For 1,000 years already. He bears the Army brand on his flank, a simple U.S., but it is faint, as if the world has tried to wear it away and failed. Elias's hands shook. He read on, his heart pounding against his ribs. Josiah wrote of how the mule saved his life, finding a hidden spring when the company was dying of thirst. How it stood over him one night as he slept, nudging him awake moments before a surprise attack. It was more than an animal. It was a guardian, a partner. He scrambled for the photograph he'd found. He held it next to the journal, his eyes darting between the faded ink and the silver image. He looked for the brand his ancestor described. There, on the mule's flank in the 50-year-old photo, almost invisible against its gray hide, were the faint, unmistakable letters, U.S. The air left his lungs in a rush. It wasn't possible. It was a story, a coincidence. An animal couldn't live that long. But his grandfather, the historian, the quiet man who collected truths the way others collected stamps, he had known. He had spent his life as the secret keeper, the final guardian of this living piece of history. The weight of it all, the 150 years of solitude, the quiet loyalty, the impossible truth, came crashing down. The careful walls Elias had built around his heart shattered into a million pieces. The grief for his grandfather, raw and suffocating, rose up in him, and he broke. He dropped his head into his hands, the brittle journal pages beneath his fingers, and he wept. He wept for the man he'd lost, for the ancestor he'd never known, and for the silent, lonely creature who had carried their story all this time. A soft sound from the hallway, a scuff of a hoof on the wooden porch. Elias lifted his tear-streaked face. The mule was standing right outside the open study door. It had walked up the porch steps, something he'd never seen it do, and now stood there, its great scarred head framed in the doorway. It didn't make a sound. It just watched him, its dark eyes holding his. Its breath was a slow, steady rhythm in the sudden quiet of the room, a living metronome, counting out the seconds of his sorrow. It stood there as the storm inside him passed, a silent, unwavering witness. Weeks later, the world had changed. Or maybe he had. The for sale sign was gone. The moving boxes were unpacked. It was spring, and the Virginia hills were bursting, with a green so bright it hurt the eyes. Elias was out by the old fence line, not tearing it down but mending it. His hands, once soft, were now calloused and capable. The mule grazed nearby, its gray coat dappled in the morning sun. Elias called him Traveler now. It felt right, a name spoken with reverence. Their companionship was easy, a language of shared silence. They had healed something in each other. One afternoon, holding the old journal, Elias read a final passage he'd skimmed over before. Traveler knows the old ways, Josiah had written. The hidden paths the war has not yet erased. Next day, Elias walked with Traveler along the edge of the woods, to the spot where the mule always seemed to pause. This time, instead of stopping, the mule turned and pushed its way into the trees, down a path so overgrown it was nearly invisible. Elias followed. They walked for nearly half a mile, the air growing cool and still. And then, they emerged into a small clearing. It was a forgotten place, choked with ivy and wildflowers. A handful of small, weathered gravestones stood like crooked teeth against the hillside. A family cemetery, lost to time. Traveler walked directly to a single stone, set apart from the others, and stopped. It lowered its head as if in a quiet bow. Elias stepped forward, his heart in his throat. He brushed the moss and lichen from the stone. The carving was faint, but the name was clear. Corporal Josiah Vance. 1838, 1867. Elias stared, his hand frozen on the cold stone. This was it. The end of the journey. A pilgrimage 150 years in the making. He looked at the grave of the man who started the story, and then at the ancient creature who had carried it to its end. He reached out and laid his hand on Traveler's neck, feeling the steady, thrumming pulse of life beneath his palm. A life that had connected them all. He finally understood. Some promises are not kept in words, but in heartbeats. And some souls are charged with carrying the memory of us long after we are gone. If this story touched you, subscribe, leave a comment, and press the bell icon so you can be here for the next story that just might change your heart. Enjoy our daily videos and become part of our community.